Hi, in this video series we're going to learn about strategy. How we go from constantly reacting in life to stepping back, thinking and making rational, good decisions that really help us progress. So how do we do this? We're going to do this by going over this book and using this book, Games of Strategy, 5th edition. And we're going to review every chapter and learn how to become more in control. How do we go from constantly reacting to everything that comes our way to stepping back, thinking deliberately, and responding instead of reacting to things that come our way. So this response of actually thinking through what's happening with us and what actions we can take to have better outcomes, that's our strategy is about. And we're going to look at different types of games to find out what kind of games do we play on a day-to-day basis. Everything that we do is a game of some sort. When your boss fires you because there's a big layoff, why were you chosen and not someone else? Strategy. Strategy will help us with that. That boss is strategically thinking and taking a specific response to get you out. If a country decides to go on a war with some other country, why is that happening? If you're living with a roommate and there's a shortage of toilet paper, and you're going to run out of toilet paper if someone doesn't go shopping, but you see that there is a wait till the very last moment, and then someone goes and gets the toilet paper. So there are so many games that we'll look at, but in a sense, why do we need to learn about strategy? We are all playing these games of strategy all the time. It helps us become more in control because we now can recognize the game that is being played on us, that we could be partly controlling, and we could play a better game if we thought through it. So this thinking that improves because now we're able to think through and respond in a better way makes our chances of winning that game or optimizing the outcome based on what we need much higher. So that's the key reason why we should learn about strategy. Everyone's impacted. We play games all the time, and we look through 6 different games as an example. And if we can understand strategy and games that are being played, we can play those games better. So a game that we play, typically, depending on the type of the game, it could be a game of complete chance. If you have to win this game, there are certain types of games that are of completely based on your chance or luck. See, you buy a stock and you expect it to go up in the next 5 minutes. That's completely based on chance. It's a gamble. You go to a casino and you put like $10 on a game that you have no idea about how it works. It's a completely chance-based game. There are certain games that are skill-based, which basically depends on how to play that game. Chess, for example, is a skill-based game. There is no chance in it. You have to know how to play it really well. It's at the opposite extreme end of a chance game. Chess, skill-based game. There is also games where a strategy is involved, meaning how to play the game is important, but like who to play it with, when to play the game, where to play the game, all of those decisions are like the strategy part. So a typical game that we play in our life has some proportion of chance, some proportion of strategy, some proportion of skill. But it's going to be a combination of this. And by learning this games of strategy and everything that started in that book, we're going to learn about improvising the strategy part, which is, what are other things other than how and the luck part. We're going to strategically think about this. Yeah. So recognize that a game can have a proportion of skill, strategy, and chance, and we're going to learn about strategy, which goes from reaction to response, from constantly being in uncontrolled state of responding to things that could have been better responded to, but now we're going to respond in a much rational, much better way. So let's look at some examples. And the way we do that is we learn about various interactions that could happen. and we look at like how decisions are going to be made, what are the incentives of these people who are making the decisions, and knowing that helps us make better decisions for ourselves. Simple example, game of tennis. If I know that my opponent has a strong forehand and then they keep using their forehand as much as possible, but whenever I give them a backhand shot, they always like fumble and they have a weak response, I know what their strength is. I know what their pattern is. I know what their dominant move is. So when I can recognize in the game of tennis that my opponent has a specific pattern, I'm going to play to their weaknesses. I'm actually going to put backhand shots more often. So game of tennis, you can recognize patterns, right? So even this game of tennis helps us understand that if we can recognize patterns of actions of our opponents, we can actually plan for it. For example, if you see constant layoffs every year in your company, and you can establish some sort of patterns. When do they do those layoffs? Who are the people who are mostly impacted? Which teams are the ones that are mostly susceptible? Because a lot of times the same team gets impacted over and over. Guess what? That team is actually not doing well. When that team is not doing well, they are going to be constantly be the target for some sets. So you can start to find out patterns. So when you can find out patterns, you are able to detect whether you are in the best position in that team or should you be moving out of that team. So game of tennis also helps us with that. Like you can play shots that are on the weaknesses of the other player and you can have a better chance of getting a point. The GPA rat race. So in graduate school, we were all graded on a curve. When that happens, you know that if no one studies, they'll all be still graded on a curve. But there's this temptation that everyone starts to think, okay, if someone else is studying and while I'm not studying, then they'll get a better score, I'll actually get a worse score. So there is a lose-lose if there is no cooperation established, meaning all of us will not study, we'll all get good grades. So the GPA rat race helps us understand the impact of analyzing temptations that make it very hard for people to continue their cooperation in a sustained way. But then that also helps us understand that, hey, if we want to play games like these, we need to establish some way in which those coordinated moves happen so that there is no lose-lose. Let's say you are two big companies in an industry. You both are making really good profits. But if you both reduce your price and keep reducing your price, guess what? You're both going to eat into your profits and it's going to be, instead of you both making profits, you're both going to lose-lose. So establishing ways in which cooperation can be done, not collusion, and in a sustained way is important. So us learning what's the best way in which I could continue to have this cooperation and not end up in a lose-lose scenario where no one wanted to do that, right? So this is the prisoner's dilemma. I have another video on prisoner's dilemma. If you don't understand prisoner's dilemma, look at that one, yeah? Third, you go late to an exam with an excuse to your professor. Sorry, I can't take the exam, professor. I'm so late because I had a flat tire. You just made up that thing. You just made up that you had a flat tire. You just woke up late. So when you make things up, it's the flat tire, sorry, I can't take the exam game, in which what's happening is, if you can look ahead as to what the professor would do based on your initial input to him, you can actually reason backwards. So this is another really good skill for us to reason backwards from what would happen when I give this input to this professor, right? So reasoning backwards and then thinking through, what if the professor, asks you how many friends you had in your car when you had a flat tire. You say, hey, this other friend who's also late was in the same car, and he puts you both in a separate exam room and asks you just one question. Which tire? If you both don't give him the same answer, you both will fail. Similarly, you should look ahead and find out what could happen based on my move and how can I take that into account for my current move so that I can reason backwards and make the best move today. We see professors in the graduate school are super mean, or some boss is super mean, or like someone that you're dealing with is super mean. And you wonder, like, what is the reason for them to be so mean? Can't they be more Allowing. Maybe the game they are playing is to avoid the slippery slope game. Maybe they know that if I become a little loose, then this person will always exploit me. So then they put on this face, they make sure that you realize that, hey, their threat is credible, they are gonna refuse to give in, right? And they will put up a face of being mean so that you don't constantly disturb them with an extension of an assignment or to not do what the professor wants you to do. So remember, the professor is just trying to avoid the slippery slope, where if they give you an extension, now all of a sudden you will always consider the professor as weak, and then you'll always ask for extension, and then there's so much work and the assignments are not done on time. So that's that game being played between professor and students. There are several such examples between professor and students, because I just graduated, and so I have so many of these examples, but these examples are from the book. Running out of toilet paper. You were in a dorm with your roommate, and someone needs to do the grocery shopping and also get toilet papers, and we're running out of milk. We see escalation happening till the very last minute, where no one really goes and gets the toilet paper. Guess what? Everyone suffers. Everyone suffers here. There's a mutual blow up. They know they shouldn't wait until the last moment, but they wait till the last moment. This is when they have not planned the game really well. They are not playing, recognizing that they're going to both lose. And so that's the brinkmanship. If you recognize that you're in a game where someone is just waiting for an escalation to happen, that's the game of brinkmanship, or game of escalation. And it's going to lead to lose-lose. So when you recognize that, you want to do something about it. Similarly, dating game. You put up a really good front. You don't show all of your weaknesses when you're on a date. Eventually, once you have concealed it and you got the other person to agree to, let's say marry you, then eventually you could reveal your true self and preferences. A lot of people play this game. So this is important for us to recognize when you're working with a partner, working with a customer, working with a colleague. Are they playing the dating game where they're actually trying to get a contract in, and then eventually I'll find out all the bad things? Then you need things like signaling and screening devices. How do you get them to actually reveal their true preferences? How do you communicate your true good sides in some clear way with a signal? So you see, with the 6 games, we recognize so many things we could do to improve our thinking. When we improve our thinking, we are in better control. When we are in better control, we have a deliberate, rational response instead of just a reaction. If you constantly react to something that the other person expects you to do, then all of a sudden you are under their control versus you being in control. So that's the main reason we're going to learn how to master the game's strategy. We look at all of these games that gives us different mental models to think through. Okay, what's the screening device I'm going to use to get them to reveal their preferences? How am I going to make sure that there is coordination? How am I going to make sure that there's no escalation? How am I going to make sure that there's no slippery slope? How am I going to make sure that there's no lose-lose? And what kind of patterns do I recognize? Just with these games. Knowing this, we can make better decisions. So that's the high level of why we need to learn this. Everyone's playing these games, and very many games that we play at the same time. We need to get better thinkers, better analyzers, better decision makers. When we do that, we can play the game's strategy, or the game of life, or the game of everything that we do in a much better way. So how are we going to do this? There was the first chapter, an introduction, a motivation as to why, how, who, what is should be looking into this. Chapter 2, we're going to look at the building blocks as to, hey, who are the players? What are their intentions? What kind of timings of the moves that they have? Is it a sequential game? Is it a concurrent game? What kind of advantage and information asymmetries these people have? So we're going to start looking at the convention and building blocks as to how we use the same common language and vocabulary to understand how games are played. Chapter 3 to 7, we're going to look at general principles, or build up mental models to find out how can we use those mental models and principles that we can apply in chapter 8 plus. So that's the high level overview, games of strategy, and introduction. Let's nail it. Thanks.